Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Q&A, so let's go ahead and get this started. Alright, first question. What's your opinion on Leroy Colbert's, rest in peace, term muscle priority, meaning that the muscle group you train first will recover the best and have more growth potential compared to the muscle group you train later in a session? Also, if this is the case, would it be beneficial to bench before squats if upper body development is a priority? Cheers, and keep up the good work. This comes from his era of bodybuilding. Basically, this is how all the guys trained back then. Whatever muscle they wanted the most growth in, they trained first. Why? Because they all trained full body. They didn't do split routines at all. I understand where they're coming from, but if we were to look at kind of the modern data, I'm going to go against this. And the reason I say that is that weak points just need to get more volume in terms of priority. I don't necessarily like the concept, particularly when we start going to things like upper lower splits and stuff. Quite frankly, you need to do your biggest, hardest movements first, right? It just doesn't make sense to otherwise. And it's not to say sometimes the deadlift can't take a priority behind others, but if you start weakening some of your important links before your big lifts, you're also going to make less progress on the big lifts. Right, you're going to make less progress. So in other words, if you do other stuff that might in some way fatigue you before you squat, you're going to get less hypertrophic potential out of your squat. And so on and so forth. So what I would say to you is that rather than take that approach, and again, I'm not saying it's bad given the time period. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that with modern data, we know that you generally do better if you train the bigger muscles and bigger lifts first. Here's what I would say. If your goal is to have something grow more because you have some imbalance, I don't care whether it's an athletic imbalance, and I don't care if it's an aesthetic imbalance. An imbalance is an imbalance. A weak point is a weak point. You need to put more volume at it. That's your best solution. That way you get the most quality sets on your more important lifts, your big lifts. You can reel their volume back just a hair if total recovery is an issue, and you still need to stimulate growth, and then you get more quality sets without other muscles becoming a limiting factor, and you can do more volume for whatever it is that's your weakest link, whether it's your triceps or your delts or whatever it happens to be. I think that's the more appropriate way to do it. And that's just based upon the direction most modern sports science has gone and the way most coaches at the elite levels coach people today. You just have to remember, Leroy was coming from a much, much, much older era where they didn't have as much data, and they found ways to do things that seemed to work pretty good for them. And they did. They got pretty good results. They really got good results. But that doesn't mean we should always just take it as gospel, right? Because they didn't know how to periodize. They didn't know a lot of this other stuff that we've learned in the modern world. Not saying what they did was bad. It's just that we found better ways to do things over time. And that's a good way to look at it. All right, next question. You mentioned before how your bench press is normally significantly higher than your overhead press. However, despite my overhead pressing, my bench has been stagnant. Currently, 185 overhead press, 235 bench press. My other lifts are making progress currently through 65 squat, 490 deadlift. What can I do to correct this? Your bench is not lagging by an enormous amount. It's not lagging by an enormous amount. Right? It really isn't. If you look at it, what would we consider to be kind of where you'd want to be relative to some of that? You know, about a 315 squat's about a 225 bench. Your deadlift's really your best lift out of those. So your bench is lagging a little bit. I'm going to prioritize your bench a little bit more. And it doesn't have to be purely through the bench press. Like if you're sitting at those other lifts, you're clearly not a novice lifter anymore. All right, your delts and your triceps are decently strong with that overhead press, so maybe your chest just needs more work. It might be time to either do more benching or time to add some sort of supplemental lift to bring your bench up. You could try some floor pressing. You could try some weighted dips with a nice deep stretch at the bottom. But in other words, your chest probably needs to get a little bit stronger. And I would say that would sort you out. And again, your options are either more benching volume or more benching frequency or a supplemental lift to fix it. But I'd be willing to bet if you just worked a little bit more on something like a floor press or something like a weighted dip, it would go ahead and go up. It would go up. But you're clearly imbalanced a little bit, but it's not enormous. And that's the thing to keep in mind. You might feel like it's a massive imbalance, but it really and truly isn't that bad. It isn't that bad. And it looks like your deadlift and your overhead press are slightly ahead. They're slightly ahead because your squat and bench aren't in balance with each other. But those are not bad lifts to have ahead because those are really good measures of real strength. So it looks like based upon what you're doing with it, it looks to me like it is overall muscle mass is your limiting factor at this point. It's overall muscle mass. It might be time for you to up the calories a little bit, prioritize things like chest and quads and stuff a little bit, some of these bigger muscle groups, and that will move you forward. It's just a matter of prioritizing for you, but you're not doing bad by any stretch of the imagination. You're not as imbalanced as you might perceive yourself as being, right? You're not that imbalanced. It's pretty modest at this point, and it's easily fixable. All right, next question. Shalom, Jason. You recommend pause benching and squatting. What about pause rows or pull-ups? Meaning that on a row, when the bar touches your body, you hold it there for a split second before lowering it down, same for pull-ups. Wouldn't that be better for gains and muscle recruitment? Obviously, lighter weight should be used. No, because those aren't really where we're talking about pausing. When we pause on a bench, we're pausing on our chest, right, to drive it out of the bottom. We're pausing at the start of the concentric rep. You're pausing at the end of the concentric rep with those. Do you understand the difference? You're pausing before you lower it. That's holding a peak contraction, not a peak stretch. It's absolutely not the same thing. And I'm going to say, unless you have a reason to do so, you don't need to do so, because the only benefit you would get from that would be you would be reducing the total load to get a little more isometric work in. Those are not the best lifts to build isometric strength in your back. The deadlift is. Hip hinges are. So I would look at that and be like, I don't think you're going to get anything really out of it. And that's the whole point there. Again, you're dealing with the difference between a stretched pause, just again when the bar is touching your chest on the bench, and your quads and everything are stretched at the bottom. They're all stretched at the bottom of a squat, right? That's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with holding a stretch for a brief second and then using that stretch to explode upwards. You're talking about holding a contracted position for isometrics. Totally different effect because of the position. If you pause at the bottom of a pull-up, dead hang, that would replicate the same effect. Right? That would replicate it. But as far as that isometric contraction at the top, those are not the best lifts for that. You're losing stuff by doing it there. You're better off just using deadlifts for that, in my opinion, because they hold that isometric contraction with a much heavier weight. All right, next question and last question of the week. Coach, will you ever consider doing individual Skype calls for a fee for those of us who aren't able to be clients? Maybe. I'd consider it. I don't really know how you go about it. I know the topic has come up. I've actually had a friend suggest it, who I've known online for quite a while, who's been a long-term follower also, who I've befriended online. He's actually suggested the same thing. I don't know what sort of rates I would charge. Right, where it might be where I give them an individual, Skype, just similar to my consultations. But the thing is, my consultations, I only charge a small amount because it's based upon the predication that I'm going to possibly or probably hire them as a client if they get to that point. So there's going to be a further financial incentive. So would I consider doing it just for some basic form checking or for questions, personal questions and things that they have? So basically just a consultation would be the way to word it. Yeah, I would think about it, but I need to think about how I want to go about doing it and how to set it up as a business model. I definitely think I'll think about it. I'll think about it for this coming month, maybe, now that you mention it, now that I'll put it up in a video. And if I do, it would probably be something like $75 to $100 an hour. Now, people are going to say, I think that's a bit high, and I'm going to argue let's come back over to reality. I probably make a lot more money doing this online stuff than people think I do and what trolls and other people rumor that I do. I really do. So my time is valuable to me. And because it gives a potential for people to disturb me and annoy me who might just be trolls and other stuff, I would need to make it worth my while. And again, to some people, they'd be like, wow, that's absolutely ludicrous. It really isn't. It really isn't from a perspective of what my total outreach, total views are, what I already make online. It's actually not even unreasonable. The question becomes, would it be worth it to the person, right? To me, that would be my minimum price for it to be worth it to me personally. But like with any other business endeavor, any other product that you put out, the question that's got to be asked is it worth it to the client? Is it worth it to the customer? I might value a product at that, and the market might bear that, but the vast majority of the individual potential customers might not value it at that. So I don't know. I need to put some thought into it, and that's ultimately what it would come down to. That's probably kind of what I'd reasonably charge, but here's the thing. Eventually, if I have enough free time to be doing multiple consultations every week for that, I have room to have 2 more clients in my rotation, because each one of my clients get a 1-hour consultation twice a month in addition to their programming. So that's what I would need to factor in and consider. And I would want it to balance with all of that. But I'll think about it. It's something to think about. I'm glad you brought it back up. This again, people will see it this coming weekend. And I don't know. Maybe I will. I'll think about it a bit. I'll think about it, because you're not the first person to suggest that. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.